In the summer of 2022, I worked as a truck team member for the Metro Vancouver branch of a household garbage removal company. My job was to collect, load, sort, and finally dispose of consumer waste and discarded belongings using a company dump truck. The days were long and the work often hard, but the pay and perks rewarding. Second only to a robust tip and bonus system, which encouraged negotiation, was the ability to scavenge and keep discarded goods, so long as the retainment wouldn't interfere with work. Some of the discarded materials were surprising. I found this guitar and this amp, with which some of the score for this video will be composed. But there were far more significant objects which awaited me. This is the story of how, in the sleepy Vancouver neighborhood of Kitsilano, I came to find an Austrian rifle scope from the company of Karl Robert Kahles, a still operational firm now known by the mononym Kahles. The markings of the scope indicated its usage on a JOH Springer's Urban rifle, also an Austrian company. Curious as to its origins, I began with a simple Google search. My initial research on the origins of the scope led me to WorthPoint, an auction website where other Kahles scopes of similar appearance had been sold as World War II memorabilia. This led me to wonder, could this object, nearly discarded and lost to history, have been a piece of Nazi weaponry, an object so horrid in purpose, complicit in one of history's greatest atrocities? I contacted Kahles to confirm this suspicion. On March 13th, 2023, I got my answer. The model was an H4/60, manufactured during World War II for members of the Wehrmacht, the unified armed forces of Nazi Germany. The representative from Kahles was kind enough to send me the original catalog from which the scope was sold, listing the price as 110 Reichsmark, the equivalent of approximately 1,180 American dollars in 2023. Also included was a manual, which details the construction of the scope with a steel body. In 2020, Tim Shinetsky, a professor at the Department of History at the Friedrich Schiller University in Germany, published an article entitled World War II, The Case of Henry J. Heiser and Frederick Flick, in which he examines the parallel practices of capitalism which led to the development of both the Nazi and American military-industrial complexes. After a period of economic freefall during the Great Depression, in which German steel production had plummeted 65%, German rearmament in the late 1930s revitalized the industry, with a boom in capitalist spending acting as the driving force behind this resurgence. One of the great beneficiaries of rearmament was Frederick Flick, a steel magnate who became the wealthiest man in Germany during this period. In 1942, Flick's company began to use forced labor in the production of its steel, primarily from Russian prisoners of war, but also through the rental of concentration camp prisoners from the SS, an offense for which Flick was later convicted of at Nuremberg, under charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Following the war and his prison sentence, Flick was able to rebuild his empire through the sale of his holdings and reinvestment in France, Belgium, and Brazil. In 2018, writing for Bloomberg, David De Jong noted that the youngest billionaires alive were Flick's grandchildren, with a net worth of $1.8 billion each, a fortune born from a legacy of genocide and enslavement, which, as Shinetsky notes on page 463, was sparked through state methods intended to woo industrialists by creating incentives, in addition to subsidies and loans under favorable conditions. The free market, little more than an opportunistic guide for imperialist conduct. This is Daniel Swarovski, an Austrian jeweler whom, in 1891, set out to make, in his own words, a diamond for everyone. Today, Swarovski is one of the most successful jewelry manufacturers in the world. Still family-owned and managed, the company's approach to affordable jewelry generated 1.83 billion euros in revenue in 2022 alone. Swarovski has frequently partnered with the Royal Canadian Mint for the production of specialty coins, and even own a luxury wellness resort in Vernon, British Columbia, decorated with over 3.5 million crystals. Much like many of today's large corporations, Swarovski has seen great success in adopting a progressive, socially conscious image, promoting environmental and LGBTQ+ causes, and offering their glass crystals as an alternative to conflict minerals. To dispose of a Swarovski product would be inconceivable, and yet, in a way, someone had. Indeed, in 1974, Swarovski Optics, a subsidiary, acquired Kahles, and continues to manage its production of rifle scopes and other optics to this day. Though the rifle scope in my possession wasn't branded as Swarovski glass at the time, its future iterations would be. Following this discovery, I began to probe the history of Swarovski and discovered that there is another side to the company, a darker history, and a story that has often met difficulty finding its way into the light of day. In 2011, Marcus Langus Swarovski, one of the heirs to the family fortune, commissioned Dieter Stiefel, an Austrian academic, to produce a scholarly biography of the first 100 years of the company's operation. In his research, Stiefel uncovered a horrifying family secret. The core of the Swarovski family had been loyal and fanatical adherents to the Nazi cause, with most members registering as party members before the Austrian Anschluss, receiving the special honor of being allocated a family block of membership numbers. Indeed, on the evening of February 21st, 1938, a few weeks prior to the Anschluss, Fritz and Willy Swarovski led a torchlit procession of 500 men, mostly Swarovski employees, in support of the Nazi annexation of Austria. Swarovski, much like Flick Steel Company, utilized forced labor in the production of its products manufactured during Nazi rule. Of the company's 165 foreign workers during this time, 124 were forced laborers, detained in company barracks. Upon completing this research, Stiefel proposed the publication of a separate manuscript extracted from the larger 100-year Swarovski history, to be titled Anpassung und Widerstand, Swarovski im Nationalsozialismus, or Conforming and Resisting, Swarovski under National Socialism. Following a 2016 presentation of the materials at the University of Vienna, 500 copies of the book were printed with permission from Marcus Langus. Here, things took a startling turn, as Stiefel notes in his article, Swarovski and the National Socialist Era, a Research Report. Swarovski is a family business, with its own peculiarities. Objections were not formulated officially, but the most pertinent argument was presumably, for what do we need this? Swarovski should address the public with its products, and not through individual personalities. 1 week before the presentation of Conforming and Resisting to the press in July 2017, 2 members of the Swarovski board objected, and now the 500 copies of the book are kept safely stowed away in the Swarovski basement in Wattens, Austria, never having been released to the public. The only remnant left, an Amazon UK pre-order page, null of details or listings. The 100-year history Stiefel was commissioned to write was never completed. One question remains. How did this rifle scope come to rest in the rain-rotten shed amidst the affluent tranquility of Kitsilano? Here, there are 2 possibilities that must be considered. Either it came as a trophy of war, or it was brought by its true owner. In his book Unauthorized Entry, Howard Margolian, a former Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes investigator for the Canadian Justice Department, examines the circumstances under which Nazis and their collaborators were able to migrate to Canada in the post-war period. Margolian notes that as many as 2,000 such people were able to achieve entry and residency within the country, and often did so through dubious means, such as disguising themselves as innocent refugees. As Margolian highlights, Canada lacked an explicit ban on Nazi immigration, a policy which stood in stark contrast to the restrictive practices on Jewish immigration just years earlier. If this rifle scope came in the hands of its original owner, it was likely in the hands of one of those original 2,000 who bored across the Atlantic. The other option, that of the scope being a war trophy returned to Canada by one of our own soldiers, remains a possibility. Leor Auslander, Joanne Rasmussen Professor of Western Civilization, and Tara Zara, Livingston Professor of East European History, both located at the University of Chicago, provide useful academic context for the potentiality of this scope being a looted item or war trophy. In the chapter, The Things They Carried, from their book Objects of War. Objects of historical significance, they note, are of great utility in modern political circumstances. Governments, they say, legitimize themselves and build emotional attachments through things. In accordance with the expansion of consumerism, bonds between the object, the individual, the state, and collective memory have been complicated, particularly with regards to disputed ownership. Significantly, they identify the state's ability to mobilize the things acquired in war, while still being able to hide or obscure the violence that undergird their collections, to celebrate or alternately normalize the power of state and empire. Reading this, I began to wonder, does this scope belong in my hands? Does it belong in a museum? Or does it not deserve to belong at all? I was reminded of one of my favorite episodes of television, the 6th episode of the FX series Justified, in which the protagonist, a U.S. Marshal named Raylan Givens, helps to arbitrate a dispute over a fraudulent Adolf Hitler painting. In the end, Raylan is invited to view a private collection of Hitler paintings and reluctantly abides. And then, this happens.
Had any second thoughts about seeing my collection?
Oh, no, I'm good.
I helped you with your case, didn't I? Then do me this one small favor. Publicly, after the war, my father recanted everything the Reich stood for. But he never did in his heart. In private, after some wine, he would say that his years working for Hitler were the best of his life. I hated my father. So this has been my project. I buy Hitler's shitty paintings, and I burn them.
Why are such objects clung to? Does their existence benefit us? Does it teach us about history? Or does the fetishistic value of these objects lead us down a darker road? Michael Hughes, a professor of history at Wake Forest University, describes himself as a reformed collector, doing his best to resist accumulating things. His first book, The Anarchy of Nazi Memorabilia, analyzes how the meaning of Nazi regalia has undergone a transformation from ritual objects to trash to commodities sold to the highest bidder. Hughes suggests that objects such as this scope accrue value through their transference through time. Such objects, Hughes says, are consumed symbolically through gazing, dreaming, talking, photographing, and handling. The degree to which these objects become fetishized is highly revealing, as Hughes states that the niche market in Nazi memorabilia was better able to cope with the existential COVID-19 crisis than businesses dealing with perishable items, such as the horticultural sector. The durable nature of Nazi memorabilia means that it is not as fragile or dependent on seasonal demand. Amidst a period of economic uncertainty, the clamoring for objects of slaughter remained high. From occupied Austria and halfway across the world to Vancouver, the history and deeds of the scope can never be fully known. What it reveals, however, is a terrible truth about the industrial wealth created through the ethnic and religious subjugation in Nazi Germany. To this day, each family and name attached to the production of this scope, Kahles, Flick, and Swarovski, still reap the benefits of the forced labor they employed during the Nazi regime, and the economic policy of rearmament, which enabled the capacity for Germany's war of aggression. Contained in this scope is a story of state and market collusion, of human atrocity, and of relentless capitalist ambition. There are many of its kind, and not all are Austrian or German. Indeed, though the abuses of Nazi Germany are unique in target and scope, they are not the only such abuses that have been incurred in the name of expansion and profit. If this is a story of a scope, it is also a story of scale, of the pervasive influence of abusive practices, of the unfathomable wealth of their practitioners, and also of the extent to which the divisions created through historic atrocities persist till this day. How forgiveness is granted to the mighty, but not the frail. How the sins of the father are excused or erased with enough power. The history of capitalism that we have is through a scope, darkly.